which is a justice, among other things, organization. And we work in consort with the city, with the CRC, the Christian Reformed Church of North America, and I also want to welcome you here. We also have a display in the back. What we do in terms of justice is multifarious, because justice, of course, is a big word. Justice, and that's what the climate crisis is really all about, too, empowering people to do something right. And that's what that's what you guys have been talking about, we have been talking about for a long time. Well, the new does the same thing, empowering people to do right. What you have an opportunity of doing when you go, grab a little jar of honey, which is, it's a pretty sweet little gift. Come on. Anyway, there's a little honey jar there that Cindy's carrying in. It's a reminder that what Revenue does in terms of justice is to enable livelihood training in a place like Kenya, for example, so as to allow people to have their own livelihoods, their own income, so they can make their own decisions. There's also a rather substantially heavy box there on the table. Here it comes now. Thank you, Cindy. Amazing person. There it is. What that heavy box is a village savings and loan box. Very often, the larger banks in various parts of the world, like Guatemala and places in Africa and so on. Thank you, man. You're beyond cool. What these places don't allow folks, it's kind of heavy. These banks don't allow people to have access to credit. So what Revenue does is help the training of folks who would like to have some credit, and help the training. If there's a slot, if I may for a moment, there's a slot there. People once every 3 weeks get together in the community and drop the equivalent of $1, maybe 50 cents into there. And over time, there's quite a bit of money in there. There are 3 locks, 3 different keys, held by 3 different people, and there's a 4th person who will then take the box home with them every time there's a meeting. And then there's what Revenue does is not give seed money, but gives training for this village savings and loan VSL association, so that people can use the money to perhaps buy some sort of a washing machine, some sort of an oven, something like that, so that they're enabled to have their own income and to be in that way substantially or financially sustainable financially on their own. So these are the kind of things that Revenue is doing. You're welcome to avail yourself there. We also do quite a bit of justice work across other areas across the world. Like, for example, conservation agriculture. In Kenya, conservation agriculture is multi-state. A lot of that training goes on to enable justice to happen across the world. We're also working with and supporting the Climate Witness Project, which you Meadowlands CRC, this community, this congregation is a member of the Climate Witness Project, and I think you received some of those on the way in here. Thank you, Cindy. And if you're the church to which you belong would like to join, there's 115 congregations across North America that are part of the Climate Witness Project already, and we'd like to aim for 150 churches, which are Christian Reformed churches, as well as churches beyond the Christian Reformed Church. 150 of them by the end of this current fiscal year, which is the beginning of July of the next year, 2020. So it's an education, it's an advocacy, it's a prayer, it's a learning opportunity. All those things is what the Climate Witness Project is all about. So thank you so much for listening, and Graham Cubitt is here. So it's all good.
Henry is the regional representative for the Climate Witness Project here, so Henry would be the one supporting him. Very exciting.
I don't think it's good. Well, let's move on to session 5, looking at some of the solutions to the climate crisis that we are facing. Dave, Dave is busy. You want to get the next slide? In session 1, we looked at the energy use in the world, And we saw that since the Second World War, the amount of energy used has increased rather sharply, and that the vast amount of that was in the form of fossil fuels. And next slide shows the energy consumption per capita, and it also shows a very sharp increase in the last 70 years or so, since the Second World War. And it's that heavy use and high dependency on fossil fuels that has led to the economic crisis. We didn't know at the beginning of when we used fossil fuel that it would cause such a serious problem. But we've known about this now for some 50 years. And it's coming to a head. And the election tomorrow will, to some extent, determine the direction that Canada will be going in the next 4 years. And beyond, hopefully, as well. Next slide. So how can we eliminate fossil fuel use? That's certainly the word that we're getting from the United Nations, that we have to reduce our use of fossil fuels so that by 2050, at the latest, preferably 2040, we are no longer dependent on fossil fuels. Well, step number one is really simply acknowledging that we have a problem. And that certainly is not agreed upon by many throughout the world. So we have to stop denying that humans are responsible for the climate crisis that we're facing. And so we have to be ready to move beyond fossil fuels and learn to do without, live in different ways. So step two then means that we have to reduce our use of fossil fuels. And there are basically several ways of doing that. It may require a change in our lifestyle. Traveling, for example, is fairly energy intensive. So do you need to take that airplane flight? Or is there something else you can do? That's only one aspect, of course, and it's multidimensional. We've been looking at some of that. But it also requires that we think differently about our economy. And I alluded to that in our third session when we talked about the donut economy, a different model of how we should look at growth and our economic system. Next. And then lastly, we also have to look at substitution. What can we do? And one may involve finding alternate ways of doing things. So instead of doing things the way we always have, meaning in the last 50 years or so, is there a different way of doing the same thing? And then secondly, we also have to replace fossil fuels with sustainable forms of energy. And that means phasing out the fossil fuel industry. And for that, we need long-term policies. Individually, we can't do a whole lot on this issue in terms of phasing it out. As a society and as a world community, we have to do this. And it involves many aspects. Retraining of workers. Workers will lose their position in certainly the fossil fuel industry. The corner gasoline station will be replaced with something else. We need support for doing research to make changes in our technology, to make things more efficient, to do things in different ways. We need changes in the building code to make our buildings more energy efficient. And Graham Cubitt is going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that he's doing at Indwell later this evening. And the transportation energy itself must also change. is heavily fossil fuel dependent. Now, it's also rather fortunate that the cost of solar and wind energy, the two primary sources of sustainable energy, have dropped drastically. Even in the last 5 years, there's been a very significant drop. I'll show you some of those numbers. And fossil fuels are now more expensive for doing many things than renewable energy. So, for example, generating electricity. Coal is actually more expensive than using fossil fuel, as we'll see in some examples like that. Next. So Canadian energy use by sector, it's always good to kind of break it down, and every country will have graphs like this. We have energy losses due to conversion of energy. So for example, when fossil fuels are burned to produce the electricity, there's a lot of inefficiency there. And so that accounts for some of that use. Some of the fossil fuel energy is used for the chemical industry. So the chemical industry, they make all kinds of things like plastics and so on from fossil fuels. Pipelines take a certain amount of energy. The vast majority is then used in 4 sectors: industrial at around 27%, transportation 21%, residential 11%, commercial 8%, and agriculture about 2%. So when you're looking at solutions to replacing fossil fuels, we have to look at each of these applications in turn and see what is the most effective way of making those changes from fossil fuel to a sustainable form of energy. And that can be different for every sector. And so it's, again, we have to take a multifaceted approach. Not just simply focus on buildings or focusing on transportation, but we need to focus on all areas simultaneously so that changes can occur relatively rapidly. Next. Many of you are, of course, interested in terms of what we do in our homes. And so this is a residential energy use breakdown from 2016 from the National Research Council of Canada. And you can see that space heating makes up a large percentage of that, 61%. If we can get that down significantly, we can save a significant amount. So this is where Graham will be coming in and talking about some of the things that he's doing then with Indwell. Water heating to keep our showers nice and warm, 19%, also a significant amount. Appliances, 14%, lighting 4%, and space cooling 3%. I was surprised it was only 3%. But then we don't need our air conditioning that often yet. So maybe 1 full month out of the year compared to heating, which probably has to go for at least a half a year. So we're using our air conditioning equipment less frequently than we use our furnaces to keep our homes warm. Next. So the cheapest form of energy by country, I found this is a graph from CBC News. I found that rather interesting. In 2014, notice all the countries where coal was cheaper. Oh, I should point here. A whole bunch. And natural gas. Only a few had wind cheaper. 5 years later, this list is a lot shorter. And wind and solar have both increased significantly. That means that in these countries, solar and wind power is actually less costly than coal and natural gas. Now this is primarily for generating electricity. because we're not quite ready to make that transition yet for our vehicles and some of the other segments of the industrial workplace. But it's nice to see that many of these countries now are finding that solar and wind are considerably cheaper than natural gas. And that will have implications for their policies again. Next slide. So worldwide, this is the amount of investment since 2010. Solar, $1.3 trillion. Wind, $1 trillion. Biomass and waste is about 115. Small hydro, biofuels, and geothermal. You can see that the bulk are those two forms of energy. The others are important in certain regions. So geothermal, for example, is very important in Costa Rica and also in Iceland, because they get a lot of their energy from the volcanoes. Next. So I'll say a little bit more about wind energy. Denmark was actually the pioneer in developing the large turbines that we now see. They were developed in the 1970s. Denmark also had nuclear, but they made the decision to switch to wind power and shut down their nuclear stations. And for Denmark, about 48% of their electricity is generated from wind alone today, and increasing. China is currently the world leader in installed wind generating capacity. We think of China as building a lot of coal-fired power stations, and that's what we heard a couple of years ago. But they have rapidly expanded their wind and solar industry and are now generating an awful lot of their electricity via wind. The growth rate for the wind industry has been about 10% annually, which is a phenomenal growth rate. Next. So this gives you a graphic distribution of the amount of wind energy as of the end of 2018, roughly. And you can see that China is leading with 217 gigawatts. That's 217 trillion watts. That's a lot of power. US at 96, Germany 59, and so on. Canada is at 13, and then the rest of the world 102. But you can see that China is by far the leader in using wind energy. Next. So why the huge towers? Why do we need such huge wind turbines? Well, the efficiency of a wind turbine depends on two primary factors: the wind speed and energy that the turbine can take from the wind depends on the cube power, the third power of the speed of the wind energy. And so if the wind speed doubles, so you have 2 cubed, which is then 8, you get 8 times as much energy by having double the speed. And by putting these towers up high and in places where the wind can be uninterrupted, the wind speeds are steadier up high than in the Earth's surface, and so the turbines then can draw more power from the winds. And then the second factor is the area that is swept by the blades. So when they rotate, the area that is swept is then basically the area within the tips of the turbine blades. And so doubling the length of the blades means that you get then 4 times as much power. And And so that's why it's important to have these large turbines. The largest turbine to date is a Danish one called the B164 that is rated at 9.5 megawatts, a million watts. The ones that you see around Ontario are probably around 1.8 or 2 megawatts, just for comparison. The largest wind turbines are for offshore use. And so a number of countries, including Denmark, have installed offshore wind farms. And this particular one has a rotor diameter of 164 meters. That's kind of hard to imagine even. 164 meters. The height is 220 meters. And that's to where the turbine, where the generator is. The blades will still be beyond that. So these are huge things. And they're basically floating in the ocean when they're offshore, and then held by cables to the bottom of the ocean. So you want these turbines to be located in relatively shallow water, so they can hold them in place with turbines, and so they can kind of swing back and forth a little bit in the wind, depending on the speed of the wind. These turbines are designed to rotate the blade if you get a really high wind, so the blade is then parallel to the wind, so that it doesn't catch the wind very readily. Otherwise, it could catch so much wind that the turbines can block the wind and actually puts a lot of stress on the towers. So these turbines are designed to run at about 16 revolutions per minute. That's why you see them going slow, and that's done deliberately. If they go beyond that, you get such powerful centrifugal forces that they can fly apart. So you have to make sure that they don't spin too rapidly. Next. So here you see a wind farm offshore outside of Scotland. And the next slide shows some of the areas around England where they have designated wind farm zones. So this is an article from The Guardian in the UK. From just this past week I came across that. And it reads that the renewables record was set in the third quarter of this year after the share of electricity mix rose to 40%. And that was 40% of the electricity generated in the UK comes from renewable energy forms. 40%. That's really pretty high. It is the first time that electricity from British wind farms, solar panels, and renewable biomass plants has surpassed fossil fuels since the UK's first power plant fired up in 1882. So wind power has actually taken over the use of fossil fuels. It's now a majority. They also get some of their energy yet from nuclear stations. So they still get energy from fossil fuels, primarily natural gas, but the coal-fired power stations are going to be shut down probably next year, the remaining 4 or 5 that they have. And the plan was initially to phase them out by 2025. But because the price of wind has come down so drastically and they've been able to put up these huge wind farms, the amount of electricity generated is very significant. The Hornsea wind farm, which is located right here, consists of 174 turbines, each rated at about 7 megawatts. And this is the largest wind farm in the world at 1,200 megawatts. Now, for comparison, the Darlington nuclear plant is rated at 1,000 megawatts. So these 74 turbines are generating as much or even more wind energy, or electricity from wind energy than we're generating from the nuclear station in Darlington, near Brouwer. Any questions? Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. What is the impact of these wind farms on water? Yeah, I'm not sure how extensively that has been studied. Because these also generate noise. And water can carry noise underwater for long distances. And that can certainly interfere with wildlife, your aquatic wildlife. So, what impact does that have out where they are? I'm not sure. We probably don't have enough studies yet to know what the long-term impacts can be. I'm sure there will be some. There seems to be no free lunch. We always seem to have some problems with any new technology. But it's a good question. Any others? Yes, Robert?
Henry, you haven't mentioned wave power yet. I don't know.
Wave power is probably not as important as these two. The cost for developing that is more costly than wind or solar. And cost, of course, is a big driving factor for any transition that we're going to have. Wave power works well in some areas, but the technology for that is also fairly expensive. So, and there are other forms of renewable energy as well, and I don't want to get into all of them because these are really the two major ones that we're looking at. Next. So solar voltaic has also been growing rather rapidly. Many of the countries that adopted solar early on use what is called a feed-in tariff program, or FIT. Ontario also used a FIT program, feed-in tariff. And then we have FIT and also micro-FIT. That's one that you might recognize more so than the FIT. The FIT program is for large operations, and the micro-FIT for 10 kilowatts or less. So that's 10,000 watts or less. And most solar panels that are placed on homes come under this program. Yes? Oh, Terra is the next up from Trillium.
No, feed-in tariff.
Oh, tariff. Oh, what is feed-in tariff? Good question. Feed-in tariff means that those who are using this and generating power into the grid get a higher return for the electricity that they're generating than what the current value is. So when the FIT program started in Ontario, it was at 81 cents a kilowatt hour. And then it eventually dropped down to 29 cents and is now at zero. And why is that done? It's to stimulate the solar industry in a region. Germany's done it, Japan has done it, other countries have also done it. They start with high because it's individuals and corporations that are making the investment. Okay, so they shell out the money. The government does not get involved in the actual operation of these units, other than giving permits. But they pay then the entrepreneur for the cost of investing into these. It's probably a more economical way of doing it than having the government finance these projects. So Solar voltaic has the advantage of where you can put it up anywhere as long as you've got sun. You can put these panels up. And they're commonly put on industrial buildings. Redeemer has 120 kilowatts of panels on their building. You can put them on parking lots, just raise these panels, and you can park your cars underneath them. Get shade at the same time. You put them out in deserts where not much else grows. So you can place these in many different locations. Net metering is something else that is now being used. And what that entails is that if you were to install solar panels on your home, you're generating more electricity than you need in the summertime and less than you need in the wintertime. And so you can bank what you produce in excess and then save that up for later when you need to draw from the grid. And that's also one reason why a number of years ago the Ontario government instituted a smart grid. It's to be able to control some of these things a little bit better. Okay? The cost of a 7.5 kilowatt solar system, which is adequate for most homes, in Ontario now is about $228 to $278 per watt installed. So that's all the permits and everything else that you need to hook that up into the grid. For some people, it's cost effective to actually put up a solar panel, and you can then basically get free electricity for the lifetime of panels, which is probably well beyond the 25-year warranty period. Next. Solar parks. What we really mean by this is large numbers of panels in one location. And one of the largest is in India, of all places. Very recent. They have an installed capacity by the end of this year of 2,000 megawatts of just solar panels. It's an area that covers about 53 square kilometers. It's a huge area, all solar panels. The largest in Ontario is near Cayuga, and it's actually owned by the Six Nations. And they have about 500,000 panels in rows, and that generates, or it's rated at 100 megawatts. That means what that really means is that on a really ideal day, that would be the maximum capacity for the panels. And of course, if you have shade and if you have sun not quite as warm as like today, it would be significantly less. But that's the rated amount. Next. So this shows you the growth of solar photovoltaic in gigawatts. So that's beyond the megawatt. The megawatt is 1 million, so giga is a trillion. You'll notice it seems to be a pretty straight line. But it's also important to look at the scale here. 0, 1, 10, 100, 1,000. It's what we call a logarithmic scale. Because if you didn't have a scale like that, it would be going like this, way up. So, to sort of make it fit on a graph, they use a logarithmic scale. But the current figure, well, last year, we had about 508 gigawatts of generating capacity from solar panels worldwide. So it's a huge increase. And we refer to this as exponential growth. It continues to increase at least 10% a year. Next. And there's my system. We happen to have a nice south-facing roof, and so we put some solar panels on there. It's about 10 kilowatts that we have, and it generates enough electricity over a 1-year period for our household. And we have actually 2 families and a separate apartment as well. So it generates enough in 1 year for that. I'm with the microfit program, so I'm getting a higher rate. The cost of my system was around $45,000, and now a similar size would probably be around between $20,000 and $25,000. So the cost is really coming down. Next. And since the sun also provides us with a lot of heat, we also have a hot water heating system. So these tubes are special tubes that will take the sun's energy, and up in the header, there's a fluid that flows through there, and that can get really hot. And these are special tubes. They're known as heat tubes. If you expose one of these to the sun and you take it out of the unit, it's got a little bulb at the end, and that bulb gets so hot that if you spit on it, it'll sizzle. It can heat up to a very high temperature. And in the summertime, I can get temperatures of 80 degrees Celsius, which is a little bit too hot. And so I often put just a tarp over one of the units to reduce the amount of heat. What this does is actually preheats the hot water that we use in our hot water tank. So on a good day, we might be able to get the temperature of the water up to 50 or 60 degrees Celsius, which is warm enough that you don't have to add any extra heat to it. In the wintertime, it can still get up to 30 degrees. And so the water that's going into my hot water tank, rather than being at 10 degrees Celsius from the city mains, is at 30 degrees. And so you don't have to use as much energy to heat up the water. These are not very common yet. They're much more common in other countries. But because natural gas has been so cheap, it's cheaper to install a gas-fired hot water heater. And that's been one of the problems with sustainable energy. The alternative, using natural gas, has been very low cost. But that will continue to go up as we get more taxes on the fossil fuels. Next. So, wind and solar, of course, is intermittent. The sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing, so what do we do? Well, we need ways to ensure that supply and demand matches. Because you cannot store excess electricity as electricity. You have to form it into a different, or transform it into a different form of energy. So when you generate electricity, if you don't use it, basically it doesn't get used. The generator simply won't work as hard. But we can convert it to different forms of energy, so we can control the supply, and the supply can be controlled by using a gas-powered generator, or we can also control demand, and there are certain industries that can be shut down if the demand increases by the consumers. Some industries can shut down, and they get special concessions for doing that, so they can actually save some money by shutting it down, and they get credit in a way of some financial reward. Some appliances can also be controlled remotely. For example, some of you may have a smart thermostat that Hydro One can control from a central place to shut or to turn your air conditioner to a slightly higher temperature in the summer if the demand increases. So that way they can match the supply and the demand. And that's all part of the smart grid. And eventually, as we get new appliances, they will also be able to sense when the demand is really high and the supply is low. They may automatically shut off. And then when the supply speeds up, or more of it, the appliance goes back on. Again, that can all be automated via the smart grid. Next. So how do we store excess energy? Well, there's a number of ways that have been tested in Ontario. The Liberals have done a good job of developing some of this. Compressed air. So you have these unused salt mines in their garbage, and you can use a compressor, a turbine as a compressor, to force air into these salt mines under pressure. And when the demand increases, there's not enough supply, that process can be reversed. And the compressed air can then turn the turbine and release energy into the grid. Electrolysis of water to produce hydrogen. Surplus electricity can be used for electrolysis, produces hydrogen. When the demand increases, the hydrogen can be used in a fuel cell to produce electricity. Batteries, of course, self-explanatory. Pumped hydroelectric. Some of that is used at Niagara Falls, where you have a reservoir that can be filled at night when the water flow is controlled somewhat, and when the electricity is surplus, you can reverse the turbine so they pump water into storage. And then flywheels is another technique that is used. These are high-speed flywheels that are driven by electric motors that can also serve as generators. So when there's surplus energy, the flywheels speed up. When there's a demand for energy, the flywheels can reverse the process. The motors serve as a generator, and that puts energy into the grid. So that helps to even out the intermittent energy that you get from wind and solar. And then another is thermal storage. For example, in the summertime, if you have surplus energy, you can use that for cooling water and making ice. And then when you need electricity or air conditioning, you can use the cold ice to cool the water, which then can be used for air conditioning purposes. So you don't need electricity necessarily to run your air conditioning system. So there are various options available for working on this. And as the technology matures, also then these will become fairly commonplace. Next. Carbon capture and storage is something else you may have heard about. We have a number of carbon capture and storage operations in effect in Saskatchewan and Alberta. The idea is there to take carbon dioxide out of the exhaust gases from a fossil fuel powered station through chemical reactions, trap the carbon dioxide, separate it, and then bury it in the ground, put it under pressure. So, deep under pressure, it supposedly can remain fairly stable. It's already being used to squeeze more oil out of the rock. So by putting natural gas or carbon dioxide gas into the wells, it actually forces some of the oil out, so they can recover more of the oil. So the technology is there to some extent, but it's a very costly process and also very energy intensive. So the amount of energy that you then get, if you're using a fossil fuel power station, you would lose about 25% of the energy just to operate the carbon storage aspect of it. So that's not a very effective way of using our fossil fuels. And we have no long-term studies on some of the impacts of that. Next. Here's a diagram showing schematically a little bit. So the carbon dioxide from here is captured, pumped to underground, where it goes into the rock. It can even be put in the ocean, deep in the ocean, where it actually becomes a liquid, or it can also be utilized in various programs. Next, I'll talk about that in the next slide. So what else can we do with carbon dioxide? There are experiments to grow algae with the carbon dioxide coming from a power station in large ponds. So you bubble the carbon dioxide through, you've got the sunlight coming in, you've got carbon dioxide, and through photosynthesis, the algae can then fix the carbon dioxide, release oxygen, and then the algae can be harvested and used for various purposes. Either it can be used as a fuel, you can get oil from it. I also saw one article where they actually can make a material by taking the carbon and making it into a carbon nanofibers, which can make an extremely strong solid. It can also be chemically converted to other products, but that usually means a lot of energy is required. So carbon dioxide is an extremely stable compound. To convert that into other stuff requires a lot of energy. And where does that energy come from? Well, it will have to come from renewable forms of energy, because you don't want to use fossil fuels for that. And so that also can work, but again, it's very energy intensive. It's a very important area of research, though. So as you develop new ways of doing things, you may be able to find some methods that are more economical than others. And certainly using algae uses a natural process, photosynthesis, to actually fix the carbon. There's a book here that has been out now for a little while called Drawdown. And I think the next slide is a picture of it. Oh, no, let me just deal with the carbon offsets first, then I'll talk about this. Carbon offsets, some of you may have heard of this. You can buy offsets if you want to lower your carbon footprint. And that basically means that you pay somebody else to perhaps plant trees, or to stop burning fossil coal and use natural gas instead. So that your carbon footprint becomes lower through an overall process. That can also give you credit for your carbon emissions. And that's especially important for nations as you're talking about reducing carbon emissions, or for corporations who have to meet certain targets. You can buy offsets. The problem is that trees take a long time to grow before they become a forest, and can store some of the carbon then that's taken out of the atmosphere. So that's really a long-term program. But more importantly, as long as we continue to use fossil fuels, we're taking a stored form of carbon, as I said in session 1, we're taking a stored form of carbon in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas, and we're releasing the carbon into the atmosphere. That has to stop. So using carbon offsets may make you feel good, but it doesn't do anything for the environment. We have to keep the fossil fuel in the ground. And then we get to this point. Drawdown is a book that lists 100 technologies that can be used now to actually reduce our carbon emissions. Dave, I think it's on the next one. I'm not going to use the link. So, you know what the number one is? It's air conditioning and the fluid that is used in air conditioners, the freons. Well, because the freons are such powerful greenhouse gases, if we use those, it's simply going to make the problem much worse in the future than it is now. Because freons are anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 times as powerful as carbon dioxide in absorbing the energy that is being radiated from the Earth. So they're looking for alternatives that will not have a greenhouse gas impact. And if they can find that, that is really going to help the air conditioning industry and will make the world safer. Keep in mind that air conditioners can be used for 20, 25, 30 years, but often they break down because they develop a leak. And the fluid goes into the atmosphere and it can act as a greenhouse gas. And so, the number one thing to prevent further problems is to make sure that your current air conditioners then will not be using freons, but will be using something else. And one of the proposals is to use propane. Another one is ammonia, which is used in industrial systems already. There are some other gases that are being explored, but efficiency is also a big factor. So, can you come up with an efficient alternative? Now, I'm going to stop at this point and ask Graham Cubitt to talk a little bit about some of the work that he's been doing with Indwell. Graham is a Redeemer graduate in 2001, and he's also been recognized by the Alumni Association for his outstanding work in the community, especially the Hamilton community. He was involved in starting up the market, the mustard seeds grocery store. He and his wife were very instrumental in doing that. And he's also been very instrumental in Indwell. And if you read the Hamilton Spectator, you will often see Indwell mentioned as a good example of how affordable housing can be done. And Graham Cubitt is one of the people that has been responsible for that. He's not an architect. I think your degree was in history. So it's amazing what you can do with a history degree. Welcome, Graham.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Henry. My degree's in history, not computer science, so I can't get my files from my computer onto the screen, unfortunately. So if anybody knows how to do that to help me, that'd be awesome. I was honored to be invited to talk to you a little bit about our experience at Indwell. And I presume all of you have heard of Indwell before. Most of you may know something about Indwell. We're Hamilton-based, a charity. We've been around since the 1970s. But we've actually become Ontario's largest developer of affordable housing with supports. So our housing is affordable, so most of our tenants do have a fixed income. We charge around $500 a month typically for our apartments. And if you're on ODSP or other type of low fixed income, that's a sustainable rent. From there, we also provide supports because many of our tenants do live with some form of disability or other barrier to social inclusion. And so we try to make sure that the gaps of life stay quite narrow so that people can feel and actually achieve very good integration in the community. The reality of our affordability, though, is based on a couple complex factors. One of them is that our tenants' income really doesn't change very much. And there's no real way for us to effectively or sustainably change people's rent. Someone who is a single person on ODSP just gets around $489 a month, which is why we choose that $500 range. The other thing we know is that a lot of older buildings use very high amounts of energy, and so passing on the cost of utilities to our tenants is a real challenge. And many people actually run stuck being able to maintain and sustain their utility costs. Those were two key factors that about 3-4 years ago, we started thinking about, actually even a bit longer ago. Around 2011, we opened our first large-scale renovation project, the Perkins Center. Has anybody been to the Perkins Center? Yeah, okay, quite a few here. That was an old nightclub and rooming house, and we converted that into 46 apartments. We really wanted to focus on energy efficiency in order to achieve some of those reductions in energy costs for our tenants. But over the next number of years, as we started to build up our development experience and work on some projects like a big mill conversion in Woodstock, Harvey Woods Lofts, we kept trying to push ourselves to become more energy efficient. And it was usually related to cost factors. In 2016, we were at a point where we needed to actually make some decisions around a number of new buildings that we were just going to start designing. And there was a leaked cabinet memo that I saw a news article, province plans to ban gas. And it's like, oh, everybody's kind of like, no way, you can't do that. It's going to ruin everything. We don't know how to live without natural gas. But in our office, we started thinking, well, what if that happened? That was just an idea that somebody floated, but what if the province banned gas? Or what if, something dramatic changed that actually would make it very difficult or costly for us to heat our buildings or run our buildings? How would that impact us? And then also the conversation around, what is the price that we pay for pollution started to emerge more frequently. So we started looking and going backwards, saying, well, what have we done to date that we know how to design lower energy buildings? And how can we actually design for the future so that we would be kind of immune to any big changes in our current energy situation, the costs, etc. But also as a Christian charity, we thought, we do actually have a moral obligation to look after the planet, to look after our tenants, to look after the environment that we're a part of. We're the owner of our buildings for the long term, 50 years, I think we'll still be owning and running our buildings. And so how will we make a decision today? Does it actually impact us 5 years, 10 years, or 40, 50 years out? So those were some of the factors that we really started thinking about. And we not stumbled upon, but sort of researched and found a strategy called Passive House. Has anybody heard of Passive House as an architectural design strategy? Henry, maybe one or two others. Okay, so Passive House sounds like it's about houses. It's because it comes from the German passive house, and then it translates into English kind of saying, but it really refers to not just like a single family home, but any kind of building that's designed according to this methodology that really focuses on 5 key things. I'd have a nice chart if I have my slides, but the number one thing is minimizing thermal bridging. We realized that was the biggest thing we needed to relearn. That when a steel beam or a concrete slab or something comes through to the edge of the building, very, very conventionally, is that would go right to the edge, and then you'd attach your cladding onto that. The insulation would be between the studs. That would be on top of that structural member. But really, each one of those things, like on old school balconies, the balcony comes out from the apartment building. All of those balconies are basically radiator fins taking heat right out of the building. And I've got a nice picture on my slideshow that shows the thermal camera image. And all these bright yellow spots where the heat is radiating out of buildings. So thermal bridging, high amounts of insulation, airtightness, because most of our buildings are generally actually pretty leaky. And so all the conditioned air that we heat or cool inside is just leaking out around windows or under doors or through the wall assembly. So focus on those 3 things: high quality windows, And then making sure, because you've got all of that air tightness, you need to have good quality, energy efficient mechanical ventilation. So bringing air into the building, fresh air, so that indoor air quality is good, humidity is controlled, but that when you're discharging all that energy or air, you actually recoup the energy from it on its way out. So those are the 5 key principles. And since 2016, we've actually been using Passive House on all of our new projects that we've designed or constructed. Has anybody heard of the Parkdale Landing? It's in East Hamilton, yeah. That was an old tavern, bar complex, rooming house, banquet hall kind of building. It just opened last September, and it's now still Canada's largest retrofit to Passive House standards. So it's 57 apartments, it's got a commercial restaurant, it's got 2 commercial businesses, a convenience store, a pharmacy, it's got a staff office pod there, and it's our first attempt at developing or designing a building to this very low energy standard. When we did our air change test, it came out at the final result at 0.3 air changes per hour, which is really, really great. So it's only like 0.3, this is about every 20 minutes. There will be a full turnover of the air within the building. The standard, the minimum you have to hit for Passive House new construction actually is 0.6, whereas many buildings will test, like my house is like 12 air changes per hour, an old 1800s house, so like every few minutes it's basically leaking all of the conditioned air out of the building. So those are some of the strategies that we've been adopting. You might have heard that we're working with Houston Street Baptist Church. We're building a new church. They're building a new church, and we're putting 45 apartments on top of it. That's going to be a Passive House church and apartment building. I think the largest, the first Passive House church in Canada. A lot of the ideas actually that we've looked at over the years have been inspired by your congregation with the geothermal. I know Henry gave us a tour about 10 years ago about that. But really trying to say how as a faith community and how as a housing community can we be really adopting, I guess they're kind of cutting edge, but they're not very complicated, strategies to really reduce our energy use. The interesting thing about energy is that it can come in multiple forms, as Henry was talking about, wind, solar, gas, all these other things. But what we've realized, we all have an innate fear, and it's real fear, about the cost of energy. One of the biggest fears that we had about switching away from natural gas to electricity is that it's much more costly. Right now, it can be somewhere about 5 times more costly, depending on the pricing scheme of electricity and the current cost of gas. But in that burning of gas and why it's cheap is that we're actually not accounting for many of the real environmental costs. In Ontario, we're kind of fortunate that we don't allow fracking or hydraulic fracturing for gas, whereas in Pennsylvania and Ohio and many other places, there's a lot of gas exploration that's actually contaminating groundwater and lots of other environmental problems related to getting that natural gas from the ground. There's many other points at which we don't really account for the emissions that come from natural gas, whether it's like leaks in the line or whether it's fittings that are loose or all those sorts of things. And so what we pay at the end doesn't really account for all of the environmental costs. Whereas in electricity generation, more of those costs are accounted for because it's generated through power plants and things like that. We're convinced that by really significantly reducing the energy we need to run the buildings, we can become less worried about the cost of the energy that we actually use. And as pricing of natural gas or other fossil fuels changes in the future, we're probably actually well situated to have very stable energy costs using mostly electricity. Then, as prices of gas or emissions go up, those costs could become unsustainably excessive. So we're very hopeful and pleased so far on the projects that we have opened, that the Passive House approach has been a very good tool to get into that low energy future we need, and indeed the low emissions future that we need. The other great thing is that Our tenants, we just opened a program in Woodstock this summer, it's called Blossom Park. Our tenants report that living in a passive house building is really, really comfortable. So, while you're talking about the cost of heating and cooling, anybody here not have air conditioning? A couple people? Okay, so you're becoming in the minority as, it gets very hot in the summertime here, and humid. Many people are, putting air conditioning in. And we're realizing that, it's almost not responsible to build a building without air conditioning because of how difficult it is to live when it's super hot and super humid. To Henry's point, though, when we're putting air conditioning in, we need to make sure that it's not only energy efficient to run, but that that the refrigerants that are in those systems have the least amount of destruction potential as possible. And the good news is that we've actually been working with some companies like Mitsubishi and Indwell, and they're developing new refrigerants that will have much lower global warming potential. That hopefully should be released in the next year or two. So as we move forward, we're always trying to assess what are the technologies that we're using, and how do we make sure that those technologies have as minimum impact, cumulative impact on our environment going forward. We're really hopeful about these developments because as we've been able to sort of advance within our industry, we've actually been able to share that knowledge a lot through CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing, through lots of conferences and things. And even yesterday, actually, we had a bus tour from a conference in Toronto that brought 30 people to tour our 3 sites here in Edmonton and learn and take that knowledge about these approaches back to communities across the country. So we're excited about the potential for us, obviously, but also as a Christian organization, sort of demonstrating our faith in a way that's non-traditional, it's not evangelistic per se, but it's saying, as people of faith, we actually believe that we can make a stand and do the right thing and actually make it a very cost-effective thing to change an industry which impacts us all. So, yeah, so that's my presentation with everybody's slides. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Greg, and thanks too for the witness that you are in terms of caring for creation through your work and through the housing that you make available. A question, do you use geothermal at all?
We do have a geothermal system on our Harvey Woods program in Woodstock. It's an old factory conversion, so it's 80 apartments in an old mill. And we have an open loop geothermal, so there's an aquifer under Woodstock that we take water out of, run through a heat exchanger, and pump the water back down into the aquifer, so it just constantly circulates. And then we take the heat energy or discharge heat energy into that water. Yeah.
It's a little different than what we have here in the church.
It's very similar, except you circulate a loop. We have a closed loop. Otherwise, the system's probably almost the same.
So you're using resistance heating then for most of your buildings?
Most of our buildings would have hydraulic gas-fired hot water heating.
Okay.
As the majority of buildings, obviously that burns gas through a boiler. So we're shifting new buildings away from the boiler system to an electric heat pump system, so that it's an air-to-air heat pump. They work. New heat pumps air-to-air heat pumps can work down to close to minus 30 degrees Celsius. So, there's a few days yet in our climate where that might not work so well, and so we do have a small electric resistance heater in apartments, which our tenants actually told us they never turned on last year. The thing is with passive house, your buildings don't actually lose a lot of heat through the building envelope, and so, even a number of days without power, the building doesn't drop off temperature because it's not just leaking out through the walls.
Is this technology being used in some of the new housing here in Ancaster?
I don't know so much about the new housing in Ancaster, but I know it's very unconventional in normal construction to go this far for energy efficiency. The thing is that we're actually pretty convinced that it's not impossible for builders, like sort of tract housing builders, or any construction really, to switch to using Passive House or other kinds of approaches like this. So we're trying to find a builder that will work, that will take the plunge and try it out. You may have read in the newspaper that we're working with City Housing Hamilton on redeveloping the Jamesville property in North Hamilton. So that's 5.5 acres. We're going to be putting some affordable apartments. City Housing Hamilton will have 45 apartments. And then the private sector developers, Mars Homes and Fran and a couple others, will be building townhouses, conventional townhouses. We're trying to convince them to build the whole project Passive House because, in the sense, we don't think it's any more expensive, really, maybe a couple percentage points. But then all of those homes would be ready for the future, both legislatively and sort of ethically in terms of the emissions that they produce. And it'd be a great demonstration if Hamilton's construction industry could actually be a leader for the nation.
Are builders open to this?
They are starting to be open to the conversation.
That's pretty tough.
The construction industry, candidly, the people know what they know, and they're like, I know how to sell product. And it's like, I can build for this, I can sell for that. And people are afraid to do something that they don't know. And the learning curve is steep, but not endless. And it's just a willingness to actually try. Where we are seeing a bit of a shift is a lot of home builders are family businesses, and maybe as the next generation who's younger is starting to say, well, the future is kind of like, does kind of matter to me because I'm 28 instead of like 58. How do we change how we build as a company? We've seen that with Skill Types Construction. I don't know them, but they're a local company, a good builder, and they made a decision to work with us, to go through that learning curve with us, and now many of their staff have been trained in Passive House and sort of this high energy or low energy approach to buildings. And they're like, yeah, it's more complicated in some respects, but in other ways it's easier. So it's not impossible and it's not difficult to build in this way. It's just you have to rethink and you have to slow down to speed up. You have to pay attention to different things is what it boils down to, and at different points in the process.
I understand the city of Hamilton is also looking at passive housing for some of its apartment buildings for low-income housing.
So City Housing Hamilton has adopted Passive House for a number of its big projects, which is great. There's a big tower retrofit down by the waterfront, 500 McNabb, that's going through a full top-to-bottom retrofit that's going to be brought up to Passive House standards. We were talking to somebody yesterday who's a procurement manager in Vaughan or York region, and he's like, we have a municipal policy around climate and around emissions, and we have these commitments we've made as a municipality. We don't know how to get there, and so we're seeing more and more people asking, what are the cost-effective ways to get to the low-emission future that we need? And I'm not an evangelist for Passive House per se, but it's a strategy, it's a tool to understand how to rethink the building design process so that you can get the goals, get the outcomes that we need. And it's working so far for us. Yeah.
How does this compare to the R2000 homes?
Yeah, R2000 homes is, I don't know all the details of that because we haven't done anything to that standard, but it's not so dissimilar. I mean, the principles are very simple for Passive House. The high levels of insulation, the airtight building envelope. That's for R2000, same thing. The windows triple glazed, and actually you don't even need necessarily triple glazed, but they have to perform really well. The windows. Really, the biggest thing I think. The two biggest things that we've had to sort of consciously relearn were the air tightness and the thermal bridging. Thermal bridges are virtually everywhere in normal construction, and you have to consciously step way back and redesign the building to minimize those thermal bridges, whether it's through the foundation or through the walls, through the roof. There's so many places that thermal bridges are evident. Interestingly, when you put it through the modeling software, you've probably all seen like steel frame buildings and steel studs and then you put the spray foam insulation between the studs, and you think like, wow, that's amazing insulation, R6 per inch or whatever, got 6 inches, this is super well insulated. The problem is every one of those steel studs is a thermal bridge through the insulation layer and almost negates the value of that 6 inches of spray foam insulation. It's shocking how much thermal bridging makes a difference. And in the right sort of atmospheric conditions, the dew point stuff, you can see on buildings that have steel studs, like where the dew forms at every stud, and you're like, yeah, that's because the thermal bridge is real. So that would be the biggest thing, I think, that was a shock and sort of a challenge to us and our design team in designing this way.
You think the building code will change in the next few years?
The building code is actually changing already. Now it does require like continuous insulation, exterior insulation, so that's a new thing. It's a step in the right direction. There's not much insulation required on the outside of the building yet. There are more and more features in the building code that do push towards energy efficiency. I think if building inspectors, some things are already in there and they're just not inspected, like air tightness. Building inspectors just asked for the air tightness report for a building, that would suddenly change the industry. Because the building code does actually require, I think it's 2.5 air changes per hour. So there is progress in the right direction, but the industry is very tight right now in terms of like everybody's very busy. Nobody has the time to think about relearning, and there's not an economic driver to incentivize people taking the time to relearn. And so I think that there's a number of factors that will help us get towards that future.